Welcome, dear listener, to Family Shadows, a place where stories of fathers, children, and the quiet storms that ripple through families are told in the voice of memory. These are stories that remind us of sacrifice, silence, and sometimes of justice found in unexpected ways. If you believe that family is more than blood, that it is respect, dignity, and the unseen hands that hold us together, then you are in the right place. We invite you to join this growing family. Subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts, and let these stories remind us that even in shadows, light can be found. Tonight's story carries a title that feels as sharp as a slammed door and as heavy as betrayal. My son locked me in for 2 days, so I sold his house and walked away. William Carter was 62 years old when he discovered that the people you raise can one day build walls instead of bridges. He was a tall man, not in the way of broad shoulders or intimidating stance, but tall in the quiet way a tree stands in a field, seasoned, rooted, steady even when storms pass through. He had once been a carpenter, though arthritis had stolen the confident strength in his hands. Those hands now bore the memory of decades, the lines of effort, the knots of sacrifice. He still remembered the first time he cut wood for what would become the family house. Anna, his late wife, had laughed at him for insisting on hand-cut beams. "You could just buy them, Will," she had said, but William wanted more than lumber. He wanted sweat in the grain, love pressed into the boards. That house, his house, wasn't merely shelter. It was a ledger of promises kept. Every nail, every shingle carried his and Anna's initials. It was where they raised David, their only son. Where Christmas mornings had once echoed with wrapping paper tearing. Where Anna's singing drifted from the kitchen on Sunday mornings. But now, in the chill of a Friday morning, William discovered the house no longer belonged to him in spirit. He had woken early as always. Years of habit kept him rising before dawn, pouring himself coffee, sitting by the window to watch the world brighten. He liked the silence. In silence, he could hear Anna again. That morning, after rinsing his cup, he went to fetch the newspaper from the porch. He twisted the knob of the front door. It didn't move. He frowned, tried again, leaned his shoulder against it. Still nothing. The lock wasn't stuck. He knew that stiffness well. This felt different. David. He called, his voice echoing through the hallway. No answer. He tried the back door, same. He went room to room, checking windows, every latch secured. The sliding patio door was bolted shut. His heart beat faster. It was an accident. Someone had locked him in. "David," he shouted louder now, banging the frame. "Did you lock this?" Nothing but the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. He pressed his forehead to the cold glass of the window. The air outside shimmered with morning frost. He could see the driveway. David's car was gone. For a moment, William stood still, chest tight. He had spent his whole life building homes, and now in his own he was a prisoner. At first he told himself it was a mistake. Maybe David would return quickly. Maybe the lock had jammed. But as hours stretched, his optimism thinned. He heated soup from a can, sat at the kitchen table staring at the door like it had betrayed him. The house creaked in familiar ways, but now each creak sounded sinister, like a reminder. You are trapped. He thought of Anna. She had been gone 7 years now. Sometimes he still reached across the bed expecting to feel her warmth. He imagined her face, her furrowed brow, the way she chewed her lip when worried. She wouldn't have let this happen, he thought bitterly. She would have confronted David, demanded an explanation. But William was not Anna. He was quiet, cautious, sometimes too forgiving. By late afternoon, shadows lengthened across the living room floor. He tried to occupy himself. He dusted shelves. He flipped through old photo albums, pausing at pictures of David as a boy, his first baseball game, his crooked grin when he lost a tooth, Anna kissing his scraped knee. Those memories felt like photographs from another life. When darkness came, William sat in the armchair listening. Occasionally he thought he heard a car pull into the driveway. He would rise, heart pounding, hurry to the door, but nothing followed. That night he slept on the couch, though sleep was shallow and broken. Dreams carried him to places where Anna was still alive and David was still kind. Waking was harder than dreaming. By the next morning, reality settled like dust after a storm. He tried the doors again, no change. Hunger gnawed at him, but he rationed what he had: crackers, peanut butter, a little milk. He attempted the phone, but the line was dead. His cell phone. David had taken it days earlier, saying something about "too many scams and you don't need it, Dad." At the time, William didn't argue. He thought it was care, not control. Now he knew better. Hours bled into one another. He paced, counted steps from kitchen to hall, whispered Anna's name like a prayer. Once he pressed his face against the window when Megan, his daughter-in-law, came out to fetch the mail. She glanced at the house, her eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second. But instead of concern, she looked away, pretending not to see him. The betrayal cut deeper than the lock. By late afternoon, William's voice had grown hoarse from calling out. No one came. He sat at the table, hands trembling, staring at the wood grain like it held answers. Silence roared around him. In that silence, William remembered lessons from his father. Respect is the only inheritance that matters, son. Money fades, houses crumble, but respect, that's the roof over every family. He had tried to pass that to David. He had worked overtime to pay for college, even sold Anna's jewelry once to cover a semester. He had thought the sacrifice would plant gratitude. Instead, here he was, locked away like an inconvenience. He whispered aloud, voice breaking, "So this is what it feels like to be unwanted in the house you built." The second night was colder. He wrapped himself in a quilt Anna had stitched years earlier, the patches faded but still warm. He sat near the door, forehead pressed against the wood, listening for footsteps that never came. And in that moment, tired, hungry, humiliated, William felt something shift. Not rage, not despair, something quieter, sharper. Resolve. He realized silence could also be strategy. If his son wanted him voiceless, invisible, then silence would be his armor. He would endure. He would wait. But when the door finally opened, when the world beyond that lock welcomed him again, he would not return as the same man. He would return with truth, with action, with the quiet power of someone who has been underestimated for far too long. The first morning of being locked inside had been confusion. The second morning was clarity, painful, undeniable clarity. William Carter rose stiffly from the couch, his back aching, the quilt Anna once made slipping from his shoulders. For a brief second, as light crept through the blinds, he forgot. He thought about making breakfast, stepping out onto the porch, smelling the cold air the way he always did. But then his hand went to the door, twisted the knob, and met resistance. The reminder came like a hammer. He was still a prisoner. He pressed his forehead to the door again. The wood was cool against his skin, and he whispered, "Day 2." His voice cracked at the words. The kitchen was dim. He opened the refrigerator, counting what was left: half a jug of milk, some eggs, peanut butter, and the leftover soup he had barely touched the night before. He wasn't hungry, not really. Hunger and humiliation often cancel each other out, but he forced himself to eat a slice of bread. He needed strength even for waiting. As he chewed, he heard faint laughter from outside. Children. The neighbors' twins riding their bikes up and down the street. He had watched them many times before, waving as they sped past. Now their laughter sounded distant, foreign, as if it belonged to a world he was no longer part of. He turned to the window and saw Megan's car pulling into the driveway. He froze, heart quickening. She stepped out, phone in hand, stylish coat wrapped around her. She glanced briefly toward the house, toward the very window where William stood, but her eyes slid past him like he was a shadow. "Megan!" he shouted, slapping the glass. "Megan, the door's locked." She paused. For a moment, he thought she might come closer. His pulse leapt. But then she tucked her hair behind her ear, lifted the phone back to her ear and walked away, heels clicking on the pavement. She disappeared into her car again, backing out of the driveway without a word. William sagged against the sill, breath shallow. His own daughter-in-law had looked right at him and chosen blindness. The betrayal dug deeper than David's lock. To be dismissed, unseen, by the family that had once gathered around his table, it felt like erasure. He shuffled back into the living room, staring at the mantel where Anna's photograph rested. It was taken the summer they built the house, her hair pulled back with a scarf, sawdust sprinkled across her cheeks from sanding boards with him. She had laughed then, saying, "You're crazy to think we can do this on our own." But they did, together. He pulled the picture frame into his lap, tracing her smile with a trembling finger. "If you were here," he whispered, "you'd know what to say to him. You'd know how to reach him." He could almost hear her response, gentle yet firm. "Respect yourself first, William. Don't let anyone shrink you, not even our own son." The words tightened his chest. Anna had been the compass. Without her, he felt like a man lost in a forest he once planted himself. Around noon, a car door slammed. Tires crunched on gravel. William rushed to the front window, heart racing again. This time it was David. His son, tall, sharp-suited, with the look of a man too busy to notice the world around him. William banged the door. "David, son, the door, why is it locked?" David glanced up. His expression was not guilt, not shock. It was irritation, like a man forced to answer a trivial question. "Dad, you need to stay inside," David called, voice clipped. "It's for your own good." "For my own." William pressed closer to the glass. "You locked me in my own house." David didn't flinch. He stepped up the walkway but kept a few feet from the door. "You wander too much. You butt into things. Megan and we can't keep watching over you every second, so stay put. It's easier for everyone." William's throat closed. "I'm not a child." "Then stop acting like one," David snapped. The words pierced like nails. His son's voice, once soft with childhood trust, now hardened with dismissive authority. "I built this house," William said, voice rising, trembling. "And now you're living in it because I let you," David retorted. "So don't forget that." The silence that followed was worse than shouting. David turned, got back into his car, and drove off, leaving dust swirling in the driveway. William slid down against the door, tears stinging his eyes. For the first time, he wondered if his son saw him not as father, but as burden. The second day grew longer than the first. Time became liquid, dripping slowly. The ticking clock mocked him. He walked the rooms, touched the walls, whispered old memories as if to prove he still existed. He opened the attic, rummaging through boxes. Inside, he found the wooden box Anna had once used to store keepsakes. Inside were brittle papers, yellowed photos, and folded carefully in a manila envelope, the house deed. His name written clearly on it. He stared at the document, his hands trembling. The irony cut deep. He was the legal owner, yet here he was, caged by his own child. He pressed the paper to his chest, whispering, "They've forgotten. They've all forgotten who I am." By evening, his hunger was stronger. He cooked scrambled eggs, ate them slowly, each bite heavy. He longed for conversation, for Sophie's small voice asking, "Grandpa, why do you always put too much pepper?" He longed even for David's old teenage sarcasm before it turned cruel. Instead, the house hummed with loneliness. He stood in the doorway of the dining room, staring at the table. He saw ghosts there, Anna passing mashed potatoes, David laughing with braces still on his teeth, holiday candles flickering. He closed his eyes, hearing echoes that weren't real. When he opened them again, all he saw was dust settling on empty chairs. The second night came colder still. William wrapped himself in Anna's quilt, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the deed still in his hands. He stared at it as though it were scripture. Outside, the world moved on. Cars passed. Neighbors barbecued, their smoke wafting faintly through the vents. He remained invisible, unheard, but something hardened in him. This wasn't just neglect, it was erasure. David had taken his voice, his freedom, and even Megan had chosen to ignore him. Yet William understood something David didn't. Silence is not weakness, it is gathering strength. He pressed his palm against the deed, whispered Anna's name again, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, when the door finally opened, he would no longer be the same man who had been locked away. He would be something steadier, sharper, and the house, his house, would become the instrument of a lesson his son would never forget. The third morning began like a ritual of defeat. William woke before dawn, as he always had, though he no longer knew why. There was no sunrise to watch from the porch, no newspaper waiting beyond the door. Yet his body insisted on rising, as if muscle memory could not forget decades of discipline. He shuffled to the sink, splashed cold water on his face, and stared at his reflection in the kitchen window. The glass gave back a man older than he felt, lines deeper, eyes dimmer. He tried to remember when his own son had last looked at him without impatience. He couldn't. He sat down with a mug of coffee, lukewarm, bitter, the dregs of yesterday's pot reheated on the stove. He drank it anyway. The silence was suffocating. A silence not of peace but of exile. He could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the pipes. Even those sounds mocked him, as if the house itself was alive and complicit in his imprisonment. Yet William did not rage. He did not pound the walls or break the windows. He endured. Endurance had always been his way. He wandered into the living room and ran his hand over the old oak banister he had carved himself. He remembered the years when David was little, sliding down those stairs, giggling until Anna scolded him. "You'll break your neck one day," she warned. William had laughed then, the sound rich and full. Now, tracing the grooves in the wood, he felt the ache of nostalgia more than joy. In the quiet, he spoke to the banister as if it were listening. "You've held us up for 30 years, maybe you'll hold me now." His voice cracked. He wasn't speaking to wood, he was speaking to memory. Near mid-morning, he heard the sound of a key turning. His heart jumped finally, freedom. He rushed to the door, his hands shaking, ready to step outside. But it wasn't freedom, it was Megan. She slipped inside, heels clicking against the hardwood, grocery bag in one hand. She barely glanced at William. "You could have left it unlocked," he said, voice hoarse. Megan's expression hardened. "David said you need to stay put. It's easier this way." "I'm not a dog you can kennel. You're not easy to live with either," she shot back, unpacking vegetables onto the counter. "You hover, you ask questions. Sophie needs her space, David needs his peace." "So do I." Her words cut deeper than the lock. They weren't shouted, they weren't emotional, they were cold, surgical, spoken like fact. William stared at her, throat tight. "I raised David, I built this house, I gave everything for this family." Megan didn't look up. "And now maybe it's time you learn to step back." She left soon after, the door clicking locked behind her. William stood in the kitchen, her words echoing, "Step back," as though fatherhood had an expiration date. That afternoon he heard a small knock on the door to the hallway. He turned, and there stood Sophie, 10 years old, brown hair tangled from play, her eyes wide with confusion. "Grandpa," she whispered, "why are you sitting inside all day?" William knelt, heart breaking at her innocence. "Because your dad and mom think I should rest." Sophie frowned. "But you don't look sick." He smiled sadly. "Sometimes people see what they want, not what's real." She tilted her head, as if trying to solve a puzzle too big for her age. "I like it when you tell stories, Grandpa. Don't stop, okay?" He hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of childhood, grass, crayons, innocence. It was the first touch of kindness he had felt in days. Megan's voice called from another room. "Sophie, leave him be." The girl slipped away reluctantly. William sat back, tears streaming silently. For Sophie, he endured. As the day bled into evening, William grew accustomed to silence. He measured time by the slant of light across the floor, by the growl of his stomach, by the ache in his back. But inside that silence, his mind became louder. He thought of Anna's last days, how she had begged him to make peace with David if they ever grew apart. "Don't let pride take him from you," she had whispered, her hand frail in his. He had tried. God knows he had tried. But what do you do when peace is refused? When respect is traded for convenience? He sat with the deed again, unfolded on the table like a relic. His fingers traced his name again and again, as if reminding himself of his worth. "They think I've grown small," he murmured, "but I am still the man who built this house." That night he lay awake on the couch. Outside he could hear David's voice muffled through the walls as his son spoke on the phone. Bits and pieces floated in. Renovations, refinance, once he's out of the way. William froze, out of the way. The words sank deep, heavier than chains. His chest burned. He realized this wasn't just about inconvenience. David and Megan wanted him erased from the house, from their plans, maybe even from Sophie's memory. And yet William said nothing. He clutched the quilt tighter, closed his eyes, and whispered to Anna, "I can wait. I can endure, but not forever." The night stretched on, long and merciless. But beneath his quiet suffering, a seed had been planted. A seed not of vengeance, not yet, but of certainty. William Carter understood something his son did not. Endurance is not surrender. Endurance is gathering. Endurance is strength waiting for its moment. And that moment, though not yet visible, was coming. The fourth morning dawned gray. Rain tapped against the windows, thin streaks racing down the glass. The house smelled of damp wood, the kind of scent that usually brought comfort to William, reminders of sawdust, of work done with his hands. But this morning it smelled like confinement, as though even the weather had turned against him. He rose slowly, every joint stiff. The couch no longer gave him rest. He shuffled into the kitchen, poured the last of the milk into a glass, and drank it cold, bitter, past its prime. He rinsed the glass, placed it carefully in the sink, and then leaned his hands on the counter. From outside he heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. His heart lurched. He moved quickly to the window. It was David. William's pulse quickened. He hadn't seen his son face to face since that brief, cutting conversation 2 days ago. Maybe now, maybe finally, there would be an explanation, a reconciliation, even a sliver of kindness. The front door rattled. Keys turned. For the first time in days, the lock clicked open. David stepped inside, shaking rain from his jacket, phone in one hand. Megan followed close behind, umbrella dripping, her face already set in a mask of impatience. "Dad," David said, not even looking up from his phone, "you've got to stop making this harder than it is." William's throat tightened. "Harder than it is, son. You locked me inside for 2 days. You took my phone. You've treated me like," his voice cracked, "like a prisoner." David finally looked up, his eyes cool. "It's for your safety. You wander off, you meddle. You don't understand how busy life is for us right now. Megan and I can't keep chasing after you." William stared at him, disbelieving. "For my safety or for your convenience?" Megan set the umbrella down sharply, water splattering the floor. "Don't twist it. We've been patient. But you hover, William. You question everything. Sophie doesn't need a second parent. David doesn't need another voice nagging him. And I don't need the stress of you wandering into conversations that aren't yours." Her tone was cold, factual, as though she were delivering a business memo rather than speaking to the man who had built the walls around her. William felt his chest tighten. "I've given my life to this family. I built this house. Every board, every shingle." David cut him off with a sharp laugh, humorless. "And now you live in it because we let you. That's the truth, Dad. Don't pretend otherwise." The words slammed into William like a blow. David paced the living room, gesturing with his phone as though even this conversation was an interruption. "You think this is easy for me? Balancing work, Megan, Sophie, this house. You being underfoot all the time, it's too much. Locking the doors gave us some breathing room." Breathing room, the phrase stung. Megan folded her arms. "We shouldn't even have to explain this. You're lucky we've let you stay here as long as we have." William's jaw clenched. "Lucky?" "Yes," Megan said firmly. "Most people your age would already be in assisted living. David's doing you a favor." A favor. The word echoed in William's mind like a curse. He turned slowly, looking at the framed photos on the wall, wedding pictures, Sophie's school portraits, all hung neatly in a house he had built nail by nail. And yet in their eyes he was a squatter. William steadied his voice, forcing the tremor down. "David, son, listen to yourself. I am not a burden. I am your father. The same man who carried you on my shoulders, who worked double shifts to put you through college, who sat by Anna's bedside so you wouldn't have to watch her fade alone. And now you lock me in, you call me lucky." David sighed heavily as though patience was a currency he was spending too freely. "Dad, don't dramatize it. We're not monsters, but you don't see how hard it is for us. Megan and I, we need space. Sophie needs routine. You being around all the time, it complicates things." William's voice rose. "I complicate things by existing." David ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "This is exactly what I mean. You twist everything into an attack. We're just asking you to step back, to let us live our lives without you hovering." The calm mask cracked then. Decades of fatherhood surged in William's chest. His voice trembled with both rage and heartbreak. "Step back. I already stepped back when Anna died. I stepped back when you moved your family here, thinking it would bring us closer. I've been stepping back my whole life so you could step forward, and now you slam the door in my face." Megan shifted uncomfortably, but her chin remained high. "You're being unfair." Unfair, the word twisted like a knife. At that moment, small footsteps padded into the room. Sophie stood in the hallway, her eyes wide. "Why are you yelling at Grandpa?" she asked softly. The room went still. David turned, his voice suddenly gentle. "Sweetheart, it's nothing. Go back upstairs." But Sophie's gaze stayed fixed on William, confusion etched in her young face. "Why do you keep the doors locked? Grandpa told me he can't go outside. David stiffened. Megan's face darkened. Go to your room, Sophie, Megan ordered. The girl hesitated, then obeyed. Her small shoulders slumped. William watched her go, heart breaking all over again. She had seen the truth. Children always did. David turned back, his face harder now, defensive. This conversation is over. You'll stay inside until we figure out what to do. Don't make it worse. And with that, he and Megan turned, retreating toward the door. David grabbed his coat. Megan snapped the lock shut behind them. The echo of the latch thundered in William's chest. He sank into the armchair, breath ragged. Their words replayed in his head: burden, lucky, step back, breathing room, assisted living. Cold excuses, everyone. Excuses to strip him of dignity, to erase the man who had given them everything. He pressed his hands together, knuckles white, whispering to the empty room, "They don't see me, but they will." And in that whisper, endurance turned into something sharper. A quiet resolve, a seed of justice planted deep. The fifth morning carried no illusions. By now, William no longer checked the door first thing. He knew it would not open. He knew the lock would hold, the windows would stay latched, the key would turn only when David or Megan decided he was useful again. So he moved slowly, deliberately, as though conserving his strength for something unseen. He ate a single slice of toast, drank water from the tap, and sat at the table with the silence. The silence was no longer his enemy. It was becoming his companion. He realized that endurance was not simply waiting, it was listening. And in the stillness of his retreat, he began to hear what mattered most. That afternoon, he climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. His knees ached with every step, but something pulled him upward. Dust floated in beams of light as he opened old boxes. Anna's handwriting marked each one: Christmas lights, David's toys, kitchenware. Then he found the wooden box. It was small, carved with Anna's initials, the lid worn smooth from years of use. William carried it down to the table, hands trembling slightly as he lifted it open. Inside lay photographs, brittle letters, and beneath them all, a folder with the deed. He unfolded the paper, staring at the black ink that bore his name: William Carter, sole owner. The words glowed like a lantern in the darkness. For days he had been treated like a guest in his own house. Now the truth sat in his hands. He was not the guest, he was the foundation. He sat for hours with the box, letting memories spill over him. Anna at the stove, humming. David as a child, building Lego houses on the living room floor, asking, "Dad, can we make it real one day?" The nights he had come home from double shifts, too tired to eat, but smiling when Anna pressed his hand and whispered, "It's worth it." For David, every memory felt like both blessing and wound. He whispered aloud, "Anna, I don't know if I failed him or if he failed me. Maybe both, but I won't let him erase me." The silence answered, heavy but steady. Later that evening, William heard laughter drifting through the walls. David and Megan were hosting friends again. He could make out their voices, proud and careless. "Thinking of refinancing once the renovations are done," David was saying. "This place will be worth a fortune," Megan added. The words stung. They spoke of the house like it was theirs, like the walls William had built with his hands were just numbers on a ledger. He sat quietly in his retreat, the deed folded on his lap, the box beside him. His eyes were tired but sharp. "They think I am invisible," he thought, "but the invisible still see, still hear." That night, when the laughter died down and the house quieted, a soft knock came at his door. It was Sophie again. She slipped inside, holding a stuffed bear under her arm. Her eyes were wide with worry. "Grandpa," she whispered, "why don't you come sit with us anymore?" William knelt to her level, his chest aching. Because sometimes, Sophie, the people you love forget who you are, and when they forget, you have to wait until they remember. Her eyes brimmed with confusion. But I remember, you tell the best stories. He kissed her hair, holding back tears. Then promise me you won't forget, no matter what. She nodded solemnly, hugging him tight. Then at Megan's sharp call from down the hall, she slipped away again. William sat back in the chair, Anna's quilt over his shoulders, and let the silence cover him. That night, alone in the dim light of a single lamp, William unfolded the deed once more. He placed it carefully back in the box, alongside Anna's photo, and closed the lid. His retreat was not surrender. It was preparation. He was no longer merely enduring. He was waiting with purpose. And though no one else in that house knew it, the tide had already begun to turn. The sixth morning brought sunlight through the blinds, sharp and golden, as if the world outside had no idea what storms brewed within the Carter home. William rose slowly, his joints stiff, his breath heavy, but his mind clearer than it had been in years. The quiet retreat of the last days had given him space. Space to think, space to remember who he was. The silence no longer felt like suffocation. It felt like sharpening. He stood at the window, watching the street stir awake. Neighbors watered their lawns, children ran for the bus, delivery trucks rumbled by. Ordinary life played out just beyond the glass while he remained trapped inside. Yet something about that ordinary rhythm steadied him. He whispered, "I still belong to the world even if they think I don't." By mid-morning, David returned. He strode in with an air of control, Megan close behind him. Their voices carried through the house, brisk and businesslike. The contractor said the remodel could add $50,000 in value, David said, scrolling on his phone. Megan nodded. And with refinancing, we'll finally have enough for the expansion. It'll be perfect. They walked past William without acknowledgement, as if he were a chair, a piece of furniture, not the man who had built their foundation. He followed them with his eyes, silent. Each word was another stone on the growing mountain of betrayal. Expansion, renovations, refinancing, all spoken as if the house were theirs, but William knew the truth. The paper in his retreat, the deed with his name, was more powerful than any of their words. That evening they invited friends. William could hear them gathering in the dining room, laughter spilling out like a cruel echo of years gone by. He heard Megan's voice, clear and cutting. "Once we update this place, it'll finally feel like ours. We've been patient long enough." And David, Dad doesn't even understand half of it. He's stuck in the past. He should be grateful we're taking care of things. Grateful. The word seared into William's chest. From the shadows of the hallway, he could see them raise glasses, celebrating dreams built on his silence. He tightened his grip on the quilt draped over his shoulders, whispering to himself, "Celebrate while you can." Later that night, long after the guests had left, William moved quietly through the house. He touched the walls, the beams, the frames. Every surface bore his fingerprint, his labor, his love. He remembered the nights of building, hammering under the stars with Anna by his side, laughing at his stubbornness. He remembered painting the nursery for David, holding the boy in his arms for the first time, whispering promises into the soft crown of his son's head. And now, that same son had locked him in, dismissed him, planned his erasure. William's chest swelled, not with anger but with resolve. He no longer felt small. He felt vast, connected to every nail and board. "This house knows the truth," he murmured, "and so do I." The next afternoon, Sophie appeared again. She carried a drawing, crayon scrawled across paper. She handed it shyly to her grandfather. "It's us," she said proudly. "You, me, Grandma in the sky and the house." William's throat tightened. He studied the crude lines, the house drawn with bright colors, Sophie smiling, Anna floating above with angel wings, and him standing tall. Tears blurred his vision. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Sophie smiled. "Don't be sad, Grandpa, you're still the boss of the house, right?" He pulled her close, heart breaking at her innocence. "Yes, sweetheart, for now." Megan's sharp voice called her away again, but William kept the drawing, folding it carefully and tucking it inside the wooden box with the deed. Days blurred, but tension thickened. David grew more confident, Megan more dismissive. Their conversations swelled with plans, bank meetings, loans, renovations. They spoke as though William had already vanished, as though the house itself had signed away its loyalty. William listened from the quiet of his retreat, never raising his voice, never interrupting. He endured their arrogance like a man enduring thunder before the strike. The storm was gathering, and in its center stood William Carter, silent, steady, waiting. He was no longer just enduring, he was preparing. For the storm does not apologize before it breaks. The storm did not break with thunder, it broke with paper. William had been waiting through the long silences, through the cold dinners, through the clipped words of his son and the sharp glances of Megan. He had endured the locked doors, the dismissals, the conversations overheard about renovations and refinancing. All the while, the deed sat in his retreat, folded neatly inside the wooden box beside Anna's photograph and Sophie's crayon drawing. It was not just paper, it was memory, it was proof, it was power. And now it was time to use it. It was a Sunday evening when the family gathered. David and Megan had invited friends again, turning the dining room into a stage for their ambitions. Glasses clinked, laughter spilled into the hall, plans for the future were tossed around like cards in a game they thought they had already won. William sat quietly in the corner, invisible. His presence was tolerated, not acknowledged. He let their words wash over him, expansion, value, refinance, once he's out of the way. He waited until plates were cleared, until wine loosened their tongues further. Then he rose. The room grew quiet, not out of respect, but out of mild surprise. It was unusual for William to interrupt. He carried the wooden box in his hands. His steps were steady, his face unreadable. David frowned. "Dad, what are you doing?" William set the box on the table. He opened it slowly, deliberately, as though unwrapping a gift. From inside he pulled the deed, unfolded it, and laid it flat in the center of the table. His voice, though soft, carried through the room. "This house," he said, "is mine." For a moment no one spoke. Forks paused midair, wine glasses hovered. David stared at the paper as though it were in a foreign language. "Dad," he began, his voice strained, "what is this?" William met his son's eyes, steady. "It's the truth you forgot." Megan leaned forward, her voice sharp. "That doesn't mean anything. You let us live here, you said." "I said nothing," William interrupted, his tone sharper now, years of silence hardening into steel. "I endured. I let you treat me as a burden, as a prisoner in my own house, but I never gave you this." He tapped the deed with one finger. "This says the house belongs to me, not you, not Megan, not the bank you keep whispering about, me." David's face flushed. He stood, fists clenched. "You can't do this. We've made plans. This is our home, our." William's voice trembled, but it was not weak. It was fury held in check. "You locked me in. You treated me like a guest. You told me I should be grateful, and yet you speak of ours." He straightened his shoulders, taller now than he had felt in years. "No, David, this was mine before it was ever yours, and you forgot." Megan's voice cut in, cold. "You wouldn't dare. You're not cruel." William's gaze flickered to Anna's photo in the box, then to Sophie's drawing. His chest tightened. Cruelty is locking a father in his own house. Cruelty is teaching a child that her grandfather is an inconvenience. Cruelty, he said, voice steady, is pretending love is a burden. He slid another paper onto the table, an envelope crisp and official. I sold the house last week. The papers are signed. You have 2 weeks to leave. The room erupted. What? David shouted, his voice cracking. He snatched the paper, scanning it frantically. You can't, this isn't. It's legal, William said quietly. As legal as the locks you turned against me. Megan's face drained of color. You sold it without telling us. William met her eyes. You never asked if it was yours to plan with. David slammed the paper down. Where are we supposed to go? What about Sophie? What about everything we've built here? William's jaw tightened. Now you know how it feels to have the ground pulled from beneath you, to be locked out of your own home. The room fell silent when Sophie appeared at the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She had heard the shouting. Grandpa, she asked softly, what's happening? William's face softened. He knelt, opening his arms. She ran to him, pressing her small body against his chest. He stroked her hair gently. Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Just remember, this house isn't walls, it's people. And people only stay when they're treated with love. She looked up at him, her young eyes wide. You leaving? He kissed her forehead. Yes, but not because I'm weak, because sometimes walking away is the only way to be heard. When Sophie was led upstairs, the room was left in silence. David stood pale, Megan shaken, their friends stunned. William gathered the wooden box, tucked the deed back inside, and turned toward the door. I gave you my silence, he said softly. Now I give you your space, 2 weeks. Use them wisely. He walked out, each step steady, leaving behind the house he had built, the house they had forgotten how to honor. Outside, the night air was cool, fresh against his face. He breathed deeply, as though tasting freedom for the first time in years. Behind him, the house stood tall, its windows glowing with light. But to William, it no longer held him captive. He whispered to the sky, to Anna, to himself, it's done. The storm had gathered. Now it had broken. And in its wake, silence returned, not as prison, but as peace. The night William left the house was quiet, almost too quiet. The air was cool, the moon low over the neighborhood, casting pale light across the street. He carried only a small suitcase in one hand and the wooden box in the other. Inside the box lay the deed now void of his name, Sophie's drawing and Anna's photograph. He turned once at the end of the walkway. The house loomed behind him, golden lights glowing in the windows. For 30 years it had been his pride, his sanctuary, his love letter to Anna and to the boy they raised. And for 2 days it had been his prison. Now it was neither. It was simply a house. He whispered to the wind, to Anna, I gave him everything, and when he forgot, I gave him space to learn. His footsteps echoed down the street. Each step felt lighter, as though he were shedding years of silence, of humiliation, of unspoken grief. He walked past neighbors who waved politely, unaware of the storm that had torn through his home. He nodded back, offering no explanations. For the first time in decades, he had nothing to explain. He reached the bus stop on the corner, sat on the bench, and waited. A suitcase, a wooden box, and a heart strangely unburdened. This was all he carried. As the bus pulled up, he climbed aboard. The driver greeted him, and William smiled. A simple smile, but one that felt like freedom. As the bus hummed through the quiet streets, William's mind drifted. Family, he realized, is not measured by walls or by proximity. It is measured by respect. Without respect, even blood can become stranger. With respect, even strangers can become family. He thought of Sophie, her innocent voice, her drawing. He thought of the promise she carried, that perhaps one day she would remember him not as the man her parents dismissed, but as the grandfather who endured with dignity. And he thought of Anna, whose voice lingered in his heart. Respect yourself first, William. He had done just that, at last. When the bus reached the edge of town, William stepped off. He breathed deeply, the night air filling his lungs. Ahead lay uncertainty, but not fear. He was no longer a prisoner. He was a man who had walked away. Behind him, his son and daughter-in-law would face their own reckoning. The walls they coveted would not shelter them. The lesson would not vanish. And William Carter, with nothing but a suitcase, a box, and his name intact, walked forward into whatever came next. Dear listener, thank you for walking with us through this story. At Family Shadows, we believe that stories of fathers, mothers, and children remind us of what truly matters, not the walls we build, but the respect we carry for one another. May you hold close those you love. May you speak words of kindness while there is still time. We wish you health, peace, and happiness in your family. From our heart to yours, thank you for listening, and may your days be filled with light.